Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. The biggest story today is that the Russia-Ukraine war is increasingly becoming a test of whether Moscow can maintain control over the systems that keep a major power running. The pressure is no longer just on the battlefield. It is showing up in Russia's energy sector, domestic politics, maritime logistics, and even the country's relationship with China. The Kremlin has spent years presenting Russia as a state that can absorb pressure indefinitely. But the latest developments show a growing list of problems that are becoming harder to compartmentalize. Ukraine is finding ways to reach deeper into Russia, Europe is building more independent defense capacity, and Beijing is quietly gaining leverage over Moscow. Let's start with the relationship that may define Russia's future after this war: China. For years, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have presented their partnership as a strategic alliance between equals. The public messaging has been very polished, almost like two leaders trying to convince the world they are the ones holding all the cards. But behind the scenes, the balance is shifting. Russia increasingly needs China more than China needs Russia. Beijing has become essential to keeping Russia's economy functioning under sanctions. China buys Russian energy, provides access to critical goods and technology, and helps Moscow maintain trade channels that would otherwise be much harder to operate. The latest example is the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. Putin traveled to Beijing in May, hoping to secure progress on the project, which is important because Russia lost much of its traditional European energy market after invading Ukraine. But China did not rush to sign. Instead, Beijing reportedly pushed for terms that would heavily favor Chinese interests, including pricing similar to Russia's domestic market. The message from Beijing appears to be, Russia still matters, but Russia is negotiating from a weaker position. That dynamic extends beyond energy. China has also become increasingly influential in Russia's financial system and Central Asian relationships. Moscow once worried about China expanding its influence in regions Russia considered its backyard. Now, because of economic isolation, Russia has fewer options. This is one of the biggest strategic consequences of the war. The Kremlin went into Ukraine trying to challenge the Western-led order. Instead, it has created a situation where it is becoming more dependent on another major power. At the same time, Ukraine and Europe are moving in the opposite direction by building a more integrated defense structure. The latest European efforts are focused less on simply sending weapons and more on creating the ability to produce, maintain, and develop weapons over the long term. France and Italy have approved Ukrainian production of several Western systems, including Aster 30 air defense missiles, Scalp cruise missiles, and precision-guided weapons. Ukraine is also moving forward with plans to purchase Rafale fighter aircraft and additional SAMP-T air defense systems. The bigger story is that Ukraine is becoming part of Europe's defense industrial base. Kyiv is no longer just a customer waiting for equipment deliveries. Ukrainian companies are contributing battlefield experience and production capacity that European militaries are now trying to incorporate. That matters because the war has exposed a major weakness across Western defense industries. Many countries have advanced weapons, but not enough of them. 4 years of war have consumed enormous quantities of ammunition and interceptors, and countries are now trying to rebuild production capacity while the conflict is still underway. Ukraine is also trying to solve one of its most difficult problems: missile defense. One Ukrainian company, Firepoint, is attempting to develop an indigenous interceptor capable of defending against ballistic missiles. The ambition is significant, but the challenge is enormous. Building a missile is difficult. Building a missile that can detect, track, and destroy another missile moving at extreme speed is one of the hardest engineering problems in modern warfare. The effort reflects a broader shift. Ukraine is trying to reduce its vulnerability to future supply disruptions and create its own strategic capabilities. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues attacking the systems that allow Russia to sustain the war. The most important update is the expansion of the campaign against Crimea and Russian maritime logistics. Ukraine has moved beyond simply targeting individual military facilities. The broader objective appears to be making Crimea harder and more expensive for Russia to operate. That means attacking the fuel network, transportation routes, and maritime connections that keep the peninsula supplied. Ukrainian forces have targeted Russian vessels in the Sea of Azov and expanded operations into the Black Sea. Kyiv claims more than 100 vessels have been hit in recent operations. Independent reporting has confirmed several strikes and assessed that the campaign is disrupting Russian shipping activity. The strategic impact is that Russia is being forced to rethink how it moves supplies. Maritime routes that once provided flexibility are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Moscow has responded by increasing strikes against Ukrainian ports, including Odessa. Those attacks are not only military operations, they are also attempts to pressure Ukraine's economy by targeting infrastructure connected to trade and exports. The energy fight is also becoming more important inside Russia itself. Ukraine's drone campaign against Russian refineries is creating a problem Moscow has spent decades trying to avoid: disruptions inside Russia's own territory. The Salavat petrochemical complex in Bashkortostan was damaged in a Ukrainian strike, affecting major refining operations. The facility produces fuel products and petrochemicals, and repairs could take weeks or longer. The significance is not just the refinery itself, it is the political effect. Fuel shortages are creating frustration among Russian citizens and regional officials. Reports indicate Moscow has tightened control over fuel distribution, limiting the ability of local governments to respond independently. That is unusual in a system where the Kremlin has traditionally relied on centralized control of energy resources as a source of power. Energy has always been one of Russia's greatest strategic advantages. Now, parts of that same system are becoming a vulnerability. Russia is also dealing with pressure on manpower. Recruitment efforts are reportedly falling short of government goals as battlefield losses continue. Ukrainian officials and analysts have highlighted the growing difficulty Russia faces replacing casualties without another major mobilization effort. Russian forces are still making limited advances in some areas, but the cost of those gains remains high. Inside Russia, the government is also increasing attention on internal security. The FSB has announced several operations against alleged Ukrainian sabotage networks, including claims of drone operations inside Russia. Separately, Russian women with military specialties have reportedly received electronic summonses despite official statements that women would not be called for military training. These developments show a country trying to prepare for a longer confrontation while avoiding the political consequences of a broader mobilization. The bigger picture is that Russia is still capable of sustaining the war, but the pressure points are multiplying. Ukraine is trying to attack the systems behind Russia's military power. Europe is trying to build a defense structure that can last. China is gaining leverage over Moscow. That's it for today's tour through the world's least relaxing headlines. If this was useful, leave a review or comment. For the deeper dive, head to restrictedhandling.substack.com. Stay sharp.